And haven't we shown you by credible, fair, and reasonable evidence that this Detective Furman would have gone in that car and by his own testimony and exposed lies from the prosecution's own witnesses, there's evidence he was there. Those stains on the door sill give up the lie, don't they? He was in that car, and probably more than one of them was in that car. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I thank you very much for your patience. I've tried to reason through this evidence, drawing the fair inferences as best we could, looking at the integrity of the evidence, and I just think there's very little question here, is there? So much of the essential facts in this case are just shot through with reasonable doubt. There is something wrong. There's something terribly wrong about this evidence. Somebody manufactured evidence in this case. Missing blood. There's EDTA. There's questions, serious, deeply troubling questions. You must distrust it. You have to distrust it. You cannot render a verdict in this case of beyond a reasonable doubt on this kind of evidence. Because if you do, no one's safe. No one. The Constitution means nothing. This cannot, will not, shall not happen in this country with you good people. It just won't. Thank you very much.
Old solid dust particles that become visible when they reflect light, such as sunlight through windows or in the light beam of a projector. These airborne particles then settle onto surfaces and on or in the product. Fractions of micrometers, commonly called microns, and usually shown as the symbol mu, M. You, all of us, are great natural generators of microcontamination. When we talk, cough, or sneeze, we dispel fountains of saliva droplets that land on surfaces, dry into solid particles, and contaminate the product. We're covered with it, and it falls out quite normally from our heads, eyebrows, and eyelashes, from our hands, arms, and everywhere else, and from beards and moustaches, men more than women. But above all, we are the great contaminators because the human body is packaged in skin. Further proof of how you shed your skin, take the covers off your bed and look closely at the mattress, because that white powder in the recesses is ground up skin flakes. And if you examine it under a microscope, you may see that it's heaving with life. Also particles, and even though smaller than many other microcontaminants, they don't float about on their own, but attach themselves to larger inert particles, which somebody once described graphically as riding to work on the trains and buses of our dead skin and hair, where one or both is an insulator, such as when they're rubbed together. While not actually a contaminant, electrostatic charges contribute to contamination because they attract particles, like a magnet, as we can see from the dirt that surrounds many ventilation.
But what about the blood evidence, supposedly the prosecution's trump card?
We had OJ's blood at the Bundy crime scene. We had OJ's blood, Ron's blood, Nicole's blood in the Bronco. We had the bloody glove at Rockingham with elements of all three. Quite frankly, we had more blood evidence in this one case than I've experienced in just about all the other circumstantial evidence murder prosecutions I've ever tried.
When his blood is found at the murder scene, and the victim's blood inside his car and home, there's nothing more to say. It was proven beyond all doubt.
It did seem as if there would be no way around the blood evidence for Simpson's defense team. In the past 2 decades, forensic DNA analysis has become key in determining guilt or innocence in criminal courts around the world. That's because the chances of identifying the wrong person from a DNA sample are considered to be higher than 1 in 200 million. But the DNA evidence in the OJ Simpson trial didn't convince the jury. What, from the prosecutor's point of view, went wrong? The defense. It was too good. At every turn, they discredited the prosecution's case. Bob Blazier was a member of the defense team. He seized upon the mishandling of the blood evidence by police investigators.
Nicole's body is in this area. Her body was on the stoop going into the condominium. And the first piece of real significant evidence is a blood drop on the ground that appeared to be the blood drop of the perpetrator because it was drops. It appeared that they were walking out the back gate. The first blood drop, now this is a drop of blood that the prosecution maintained was OJ's blood. We maintain that they completely destroyed any DNA that was in this blood drop because of the way they collected the evidence.
Somebody manufactured evidence in this case. Missing blood. There's EDTA. There's questions, serious, deeply troubling questions. You must distrust it. You have to distrust it. You cannot render a verdict in this case of beyond a reasonable doubt on this kind of evidence.
Mark Taylor is a DNA expert who was hired as a consultant by Simpson's defense team.
We've prepared a trail of blood drops like one might find at a crime scene. What we're going to demonstrate is the techniques that would be involved in collecting a set of samples like that. The first technique that we want to know is, does this react as though it is blood? We have something that appears to be a blood stain, but there are other things that might give us that kind of appearance. So we're going to do a presumptive test to see if it reacts with the chemical characteristics of blood.
So first I take a sterile piece of filter paper, fold it up to make a crease. I'm going to come over to the stain, and using the crease, I'm going to pick up a tiny amount of the stain on my filter paper. Now I'm going to take my chemicals. The first one is called orthotolidine. I add 1 drop. And now if this is blood, it will give me a bluish color when I add my second chemical.
So what we have here is a positive test for blood. Now we're going to collect that stain for further testing in the laboratory. The wet swatch will rehydrate the blood that we have in the stain. As it rehydrates it, it dissolves it, and it can then be picked up by the swatch. That swatch can then be taken back to the laboratory for testing. So we now have the swatches in a plastic bag. That was then placed by L.A.P.D. into a manila envelope which was labeled. The difference at this stage is that we will be putting this into basically an ice chest. Refrigeration is critical for samples that have been collected wet to stop bacterial activity from taking place. Now, this step of refrigerating the sample is the critical difference between what we have done today and what L.A.P.D. did. L.A.P.D. ended up taking the swatches, putting them in plastic bags, but then left them at room temperature or higher in the back of their crime scene vehicle. By refrigerating the sample or by drying the sample, you stop the growth of bacteria and other microorganisms. The growth of the bacteria and microorganisms feeding on the blood breaks down the human DNA that's in that
sample. An important topic, contamination. What does it mean? Contamination is the technical term for impurities on surfaces and materials through undesired foreign substances. Impurities can be of the most different types, for example dust particles, tiny splinters of glass, or product residues. However, the most cunning troublemakers are microorganisms such as fungi, viruses, or bacteria. In short, pathogens. They are tiny and invisible to the naked eye, and yet they are everywhere. Just how tiny they are is shown by this pin. With large magnification, you can see how many pathogens fit on the needle point. Pathogens have another property. They are able to multiply drastically within an extremely short period of time, as is shown in this animated cartoon. Bacteria can multiply so fast that they would cover the floor area of several detached houses within.
There's very little question here, is there? So much of the essential facts in this case are just shot through with reasonable doubt. There is something wrong. There's something terribly wrong about this evidence. Somebody manufactured evidence in this case.